We all know the feeling. One moment you're peacefully playing the guitar, the next moment you find yourself hiding from the Bach police. But they will find you. And they will put you in Bach prison. No more parallel fifths, condemned to play Fuchs and Pachelde for all of eternity. And certainly never again on this weird instrument, doesn't have enough strings anyway. You know who really actually went to prison? Johann Sebastian Bach himself. The musical saint we're all afraid to misinterpret, the personified overlord of Western classical music, spent nearly a month behind bars. The charge? Bach tried to leave his position in Weimar to look for a better job. His boss, Duke Wilhelm Ernst, didn't like that and sent the uppity musician to the royal slammer. Bach was human, frustrated, ambitious, even rebellious. We're not dealing with a perfect musical deity. When playing his music, we're engaging with a breathing, striving, occasionally imprisoned artist, who also wrote some of the very best music you can play on this instrument, even though Bach probably never even touched a guitar. Playing Bach on guitar presents a unique paradox. We navigate endless debates about transcription. We perform under the considerable weight of performance history. Our journey today is to find a common ground, to understand Bach's musical heart, and in doing so to liberate, not restrict our own musical voice. If you enjoy these videos, don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out our new platform Tonebase Music, where you can explore theory, composition, recording techniques and more to become a complete musician beyond just your instrument. To truly connect with Bach's music on the guitar, it helps to understand the sound worlds he himself cherished. And it turns out Bach had a particular fondness for the nuanced, resonant tone colors of plucked and touch-sensitive string instruments. First, let's meet the Latent or lute harpsichord. Imagine a harpsichord, but instead of metal strings, it's strung with gut, like a lute. The result? The sound is far softer, warmer, and more intimate than its brassy cousin. Bach didn't just know of this instrument, he owned two of them at the time of his death. He was so invested in this instrument that around 1740, Bach even collaborated with instrument builder Zacharias Hildebrand to design a Lautenwerk featuring gut strings and a smaller register of brass for added resonance. Many of the pieces we guitarists know as lute works were likely intended for this lute harpsichord. Bach was actively seeking a plucked, resonant, yet delicate, and expressive sound, qualities that resonate deeply with the potential of our classical guitar. Then there's of course the clavichord. In Bach's Germany, this was the king of intimate keyboard expression. Unlike the harpsichord, the clavichord is touch-sensitive. The player can actually control dynamics directly with their fingers and even create a subtle vibrato called Bebung. Johann Nicolaus Forkel, Bach's first biographer, tells us that Bach preferred the clavichord to the harpsichord, finding the latter lacking in soul. For the practice and intimate music making, Bach regarded the clavichord as the best instrument to express his finest thoughts. Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, Johann Sebastian's famous son, often reiterated his father's esteem for the clavichord's expressivity. For us guitarists, this is another crucial insight. Bach deeply valued nuance, the ability to shape a phrase with subtle shifts in volume and color. Expressive capabilities the classical guitar in its own way can beautifully offer. And no exploration of Bach and plucked strings would be complete without mentioning Sylvius Leopold Weiss. Weiss was the rock star of the Baroque lute, a composer and virtuoso of the highest order. We know from historical accounts that Bach and Weiss were friends. In 1739, Weiss visited Bach in Leipzig. Bach's secretary, Johann Elias Bach, reported that a friendship developed between the two, and on at least one occasion the two grandmasters played together and may have challenged each other to improvise on given themes. Imagine that, Bach likely on the keyboard or Lautenwerk, and Weiss on lute engaged in an impromptu improvisation duel. More concretely, Bach so admired Weiss's music that he arranged one of Weiss's lute sonatas into his own sonata for violin and harpsichord, BWV 1025. So what about those beloved Bach lute suites? For generations of guitarists, these have been pillars of our repertoire. Most of these pieces don't survive in lute tablature, the specific notation for lutenists. Instead, many, like BWV 999, are written on two staves, typical keyboard notation. Keys like E-flat major for BWV 998 are quite unlutenistic for the standard Baroque lute. Take BWV 995 in G minor, the suite based on cello suite number 5. It survives in Bach's autograph manuscript titled Suite pour la lutte par Bach. This French title suggests it was intended for lute. However, the piece extends down to a low G in the bass, which is lower than any 13-course Baroque lute's standard range. This implies that Bach, writing it out, was not constrained by actual lute limits. These works were likely conceived at the keyboard, probably a Lautenwerk or clavichord, rather than composed directly on the lute. Bach, it seems, was captivated by the sonority of the lute, its resonance and intimacy, but he used his formidable keyboard technique as his compositional workbench, obviously. We even have an account from Bach's student Agricola, who recalled Bach playing his own solo violin sonatas and partitas on the clavichord, adding as much in the way of harmony as he found necessary. This is quite telling. It reveals Bach's flexible, pragmatic approach to instrumentation and arrangement. By 1982, the authoritative Neue Bach-Ausgabe formally categorized these pieces as Werke für Lauteninstrumente, works for lute instruments, deliberately using a vague term to include lute, Lautenwerk, or other plucked strings. This represents the scholarly consensus moving away from the simplistic view that Bach wrote lute music. What does this mean for us guitarists? Far from diminishing these pieces, this understanding is actually liberating for us. We aren't struggling to recreate an elusive, perfect lute original that probably never existed in that form. Instead, we are participating in a tradition of realizing Bach's profound musical ideas on another wonderfully sympathetic plucked string instrument. Bach's journey to the classical guitar is a story of rediscovery and passionate adaptation. After his death, Bach's music faded somewhat, until Felix Mendelssohn's landmark 1829 performance of the St. Matthew Passion sparked a major Bach revival in the 19th century. The prominent Romantic-era guitarists like Merz, Costa and Rigondi didn't really engage with Bach. While they were contemporaries of this revival, and we know Rigondi knew Mendelssohn, their focus was largely on the operatic fantasies and bravura pieces of their day. However, Napoleon Coste did show an early interest in historical plucked instruments by transcribing 17th century lute music for the guitar, a pioneering effort. It was really in the late 19th and early 20th centuries that Bach began to find a home on the guitar. Francisco Tárrega is widely credited as the first to make significant Bach transcriptions for our instrument. His arrangement of the Bourrée in E minor from BWV 996 became a standard guitar study. His student Miguel Llobet carried this forward, and it was Llobet's arrangement that captivated a young Andrés Segovia. A major catalyst was the work of Hans Dagobert Brugger. In 1921, Brugger published the first complete edition of Bach's lute suites transcribed for guitar. This even predates the BWV numbering and was incredibly forward-thinking. Brugger, a German guitarist, used a 10-string lute guitar hybrid for his transcriptions. His editions presented Bach's suites in guitar notation. Segovia obtained Brugger's editions, and it guided his choice of repertoire, and Segovia more than anyone cemented Bach's place in the guitar canon. Segovia's 1935 Paris premiere of the Chaconne was nothing short of a sensation. The reception was dramatic. Some were astonished that the guitar could voice this monumental piece, while others were scandalized. One critic exclaimed, "Horrors of horrors, the sacred Chaconne, its profanation by a guitarist." This reaction shows just how revolutionary it was to hear Bach on guitar at that time. Segovia went on to champion other Bach pieces. He transcribed and performed the Prelude from Cello Suite No. 1, Prelude BWV 998, parts of Lute suites, and the Fugue in G minor BWV 1000. Each became a staple in the guitar repertory. The mid-20th century saw, of course, guitarists like Joachim Bream and John Williams produce iconic recordings of Bach's lute works, bringing this music to a vast audience. Bream recorded a Bach recital for guitar in 1956, featuring portions of BWV 996, 997, and a complete BWV 998 and 999. In 1965, he released Lute Suites Numbers 1 and 2 on guitar, containing the full E minor and C minor suites. Williams later recorded the 4 Lute Suites, presenting BWV 995 to 998 in polished, virtuosic readings. The repertoire expanded further with transcriptions of the cello suites and violin sonatas. Today, playing Bach on guitar often incorporates insights from historically informed performance. We consult Urtext editions, consider Baroque dance rhythms, ornamentation, and articulation. The goal always is to blend historical knowledge with the guitar's expressive voice, creating interpretations that are both informed and deeply personal. One of the richest resources for us guitarists tackling Bach is to listen to and learn from how musicians on the other instruments approach his music. Glenn Gould, for example, was famous for his incredibly clear, often pedal-free Bach, where every contrapuntal line sings with pristine distinction. We guitarists can emulate this by striving for absolute clarity in our articulation. Imagine each finger, each string as an independent voice contributing to the whole.
What leads us to decide how to phrase? Now, I was taught when I was a kid there are 3 things in music: harmony, melody, and rhythm. And I think that in Baroque music, harmony should be at the top of the list. Django Reinhardt, the jazz guitarist, used to say that Baroque music was like jazz, that it all comes from the bass. In the 19th century, and I've played 19th century music, it's so much to do with the top voice. And that's why there's one of my little pet peeves that I hear lute players do when we have a 2-note chord. I'm just playing an octave. If we're more in a modern planet, we'll go, and of course that separates it and it gives an emphasis to the top note. I would always recommend to guitarists and even lute players that if you have to slur something, it's not a cop-out. You're not doing it because you can't play it quickly. You're doing it to be expressive. A slur, stronger, weaker, and you can sigh, you can snap, you can make it quite a varied expression. So from bar 3 again, that I think of as a C major 7th chord, and then
there are the string players. Violinists and cellists naturally phrase Bach's lines with a sense of breath, much like a singer. They don't play large Bach chords as solid blocks. Instead, they roll or break them, allowing the harmony to unfold without a harsh attack. As guitarists, we can of course adopt this, arpeggiating chords gently, using micro pauses or slight elongations of notes to delineate phrases like a row lift. And consider Nigel North's insight from the lute. Left-hand slurs inherently create a diminuendo, a little sigh. Even if we don't always slur, we can aim for that expressive shaping in our right hand. One of Bach's most magical qualities, especially in his solo instrumental music, is latent polyphony. This is where a single melodic line cleverly implies multiple independent voices. Recognizing and articulating these hidden voices is crucial for a rich Bach interpretation on guitar. Bach essentially trusted the musician to hear these layers. A perfect example is the Prelude from BWV 998. It is written in what's called style brisé, a broken chord style typical of the lute, where arpeggios weave a delicate implied polyphony. Here, guitarists can often identify 2 or even 3 distinct voices. The bass notes should often be held longer than strictly notated by rests in some editions, providing a harmonic anchor. An inner tenor voice might emerge, creating suspensions and resolutions against this bass. So how do we as guitarists unveil these hidden voices? Sustain and overlap notes strategically. Let important bass notes ring. Campanella fingerings, playing scalar passages across multiple strings, so notes shimmer and overlap, creating a richer harmonic texture. Use selective emphasis. Play the notes of a primary melodic line a touch louder or with a more focused tone, perhaps with a rest stroke, while the surrounding notes are lighter. Third, differentiate tone color. Use ponticello for a clear bass and tasto for a warm melody, or the other way around. Vary articulation. One implied voice might be legato, another more detached. Tiny micropauses can separate interjecting voices. Make conscious fingering choices that facilitate all of this, mapping these implied voices onto the fretboard in a way that lets them sing. Bringing all these ideas together, how do we approach Bach on the guitar today in a way that feels both authentic and personal?
Copying a good speaker, playing as though we're speaking and moving people. And in speech, there's up and down, we have consonants and vowels. We have the ends of the sentences, we'll have the break, we'll have a comma, a full stop, and so on. We have to find that in the music. Maybe the first really foreign idea for most of us is that they talked of good and bad notes. It's not a pejorative term, it's just the good notes were the ones on the strong beats, and the bad notes, the ones between.
Never forget the dance in Bach. So much of his instrumental music, Allemands, courants, sarabans, gigue, bourrée, is rooted in dance. Feel the characteristic pulse, the effect of each specific dance. Saraband rhythms are often based on 2-bar dance stretches with shifting accents, rather than a monotonous stress on the second beat of every bar. Even in complex forms like canons or fuguettas, an underlying dance-like structure or bassline is often the key. Think of phrasing as rhetoric, especially with Baroque music. The musician has the role of an orator on the instrument. This means understanding the hierarchy of good and bad notes within the meter, using punctuation like commas and full stops through
articulation. It was a subject that used to frighten me when I was initially playing lute and guitar. I didn't actually know what it meant. And it simply means how we produce our notes. Relating it to speaking, it's like, what's the quality of the consonants, the beginnings of the notes and the ends, and what's the quality of the vowels? Can we get a phrase to sing where there's almost no consonants? Or if we want to accent one particular note,
and letting harmony guide our phrasing. Dissonance often craves emphasis, resolution brings release. Third, ornamentation is expression, not just decoration. Baroque conventions are our guide. Trills generally start from the upper note. Appoggiaturas lean into the beat and resolve gently.
La música solo existe en el momento en que se toca. Entonces, no tengan miedo, simplemente tóquenla.
Don't be afraid, explore, experiment, and simply play. I encourage you to listen broadly. To guitarists, yes, of course, but also to lutenists, violinists, cellists, and keyboardists. Each offer a unique window into Bach's genius. And the goal isn't to find a single correct way to play Bach, but to cultivate an informed, heartfelt, and musically compelling interpretation. Bach's magnificent structures are not rigid prisons. And now, with tonebase music, you can explore even deeper. Our new platform goes beyond instrument-specific instruction. to build your complete musicianship with expert-led courses on theory, history, composition and practice strategies from world-renowned musicians. We also offer practical technical training on music production, recording techniques, DAWs like Logic and video editing, essential skills for today's classical musicians, from mic placement to mixing, from notation software to creating professional recordings. We provide the technical toolkit modern musicians need. Start your free 14-day trial today at tonebase.co/music, tonebase.co/music, and transform your understanding of Bach and beyond.
And professional recording.
The beauty of this work is it's your creativity that's allowed to shine.
Is it easy? Absolutely not. But at the end of the day, it's all about the love for creating music.